Greetings, comrades! We are completing the 4th level of the Russian Conspiracy Iceberg. Today you will learn about the secret negotiations between Joseph Stalin and the world's Zionist elite, and about some mega-projects to connect Eurasia with North America. I will also give you a couple more stories from the lives of Yuri Gagarin and Mikhail Lomonosov. And finally, there will be another high-profile political assassination from the 90s. What would we do without them? Club Android. Let's start with some light, harmless local urban legend, this time from St. Petersburg. It is especially popular among local diggers. Allegedly, during the construction of the Admiralteyskaya metro station in the 1980s, the builders dug and built a whole station. But then for some reason the exit from it was moved almost a kilometer away, and the construction itself was mothballed. The new station did not open until 2011, before which it was a ghost station. In fact, there's nothing mystical in it. It was just hard to find a place for the exit to the surface among the historical buildings. But according to urban legend, in the late 1980s and in the late 1990s, this mothballed station was home to a super-secret underground techno club, where Western electronic music was played, and which could be accessed either by paying metro staff or through hidden passages from the surface. Slavina's self-immolation. Irina Slavina was a Russian journalist and public figure who committed an act of self-immolation in front of the Ministry of Internal Affairs building in Nizhny Novgorod in October 2020. Those close to her believe that the journalist took such a step due to years of pressure from local authorities. The night before the event, her house was searched. In her last post on social networks, Slavina blamed the Russian Federation for her death. Some local officials insisted that Slavina just had some form of mental illness. Anyway, the investigative committee of Russia has refused to initiate criminal proceedings under the article Incitement to Suicide 4 times already. Stalin's Samovars. Stalin's Samovars is a rather cynical nickname given to the armless and legless invalids who returned from World War II and found themselves on the streets of Soviet cities. Subsequently, they were all allegedly collected from the streets by the NKVD and taken to remote boarding houses and closed hospitals. I have already told you more about this phenomenon in this video. UNK Proton. The last great project of Soviet science is an unfinished proton-proton collider powered by superconducting magnets at the Institute of High Energy Physics in Protvino, Moscow region. It was excavated at a depth of 20 to 60 meters and mothballed in the 90s. Its size is similar to the Large Hadron Collider, but due to a lack of funding, the tunnel itself remained the only 100% completed part of the project. In 1994, the money completely dried up, and it became impossible to order equipment or pay salaries to workers. Nevertheless, the complex itself is still guarded, ventilation and lighting still work, and water is regularly pumped out of the tunnels. This has led to numerous rumors about the real purpose of the multi-kilometer tunnels. According to one report, there are spent nuclear fuel storage facilities somewhere. According to others, the project was still completed and the collider was launched, but then for some reason it was urgently abandoned and mothballed, and all the equipment was removed. They say that all the tunnel security is needed not to prevent someone from the outside from getting inside, but exactly the opposite. Gagarin's death. And here's the second portion of theories about Gagarin, this time about his death. Let me remind you that according to the official version, he tragically died on March 27, 1968 in a plane crash during a training flight. The materials of the official investigation of the crash were not published during the Soviet era, which gave rise to many rumors. I mentioned one version earlier. Allegedly, he was eliminated by the Soviet authorities to hide the fact that the real first cosmonaut was not him at all, and the flight was falsified. Another version is that Gagarin had a conflict with Leonid Brezhnev, who was annoyed by Gagarin's growing popularity. Moreover, it almost came to the point that Gagarin threw a shot of vodka in Brezhnev's face. Then the KGB decided to fake the death of a national hero and put him in a psychiatric hospital. Another version is that Gagarin died after his airplane lost control due to a meeting with a UFO. Allegedly, his last words were about meeting some kind of luminous disk. Finally, another theory. Gagarin himself was tired of popularity and asked to fake his death, and then lived under an alias in the Orenburg region until old age. In fact, the case is strange even without conspiracy. According to the official conclusions, two experienced pilots completed the tests, were about to fly to the base, but then made a maneuver that led to a collision with the ground. How, why, because of what? It's unclear. Alexander Nevskiy was a Muslim. Alexander Nevskiy is another former prince of Novgorod and Kiev and at the same time a saint of the Russian Orthodox Church, who is suspected of being of a different faith. Only unlike Vladimir, he was not a Jew, but a Muslim. In general, he is an extremely contradictory person. On the one hand, a great ruler who protected Russia from the Livonian threat from the west, and on the other hand, it was under him that the Russian lands fell into more than 200 years of dependence on the Mongol horde. The prince himself went to Mongolia often and completely obeyed them. But okay, are there any reasons to believe that he professed Islam? First, the main means of payment during Alexander Nevsky's rule were Arabian dirhams. Quite suspicious. Secondly, the so-called Yerihonskaya cap, according to the legend belonging to Nevsky, is kept in the Moscow Kremlin. On it, the inscription "Rejoice faithful with the promise of the help from the Allah and the speedy victory" is printed in Arabic. Also, there are annals of John of Plano Carpini, the papal envoy at the court of Khan Bati, which indicate that the future prince was literally raised in the horde and was completely faithful to the Tatar Mongols. All this, however, is destroyed by one small detail. At the time of Alexander Nevsky, Islam was not the official religion of the horde. This happened only about 100 years later. So he could be a puppet of the horde, but not a Muslim. The Aviamotornaya incident. The Aviamotornaya tragedy, also known as 110 seconds of meat grinder, is the collapse of escalator number 4 at the Aviamotornaya station of the Moscow Metro, which occurred on February 17, 1982, around 5 p.m. Due to the failure of the mechanism, the staircase cart lost its grip on the engine and the escalator began to pick up speed rapidly. People started falling off it, forming a huge heap at the bottom. 8 people died in the incident, 30 more were severely injured. Like many other stories from the Soviet era, this one got into the iceberg largely because under Soviet rule such tragedies were hushed up. As a result, the city was filled with rumors about hundreds of dead people who fell into the engine room under the escalator and were torn apart by the working mechanisms, about the station drenched in blood. Others told the story of a policeman who miraculously clung to the handrail, but so many people were hanging on to him that his arms were torn off. It should be noted that the floor of Aviamotornaya is really paved with marble of reddish color, similar to blood, and many people consider these blood stains as a proof of the truthfulness of the most horrible gossip. There were also stories about saboteur designers who allegedly received the Stalin Prize for this escalator and then immediately went abroad. Panic was also supported by Western radio stations, which were happy to spread the craziest rumors about the incident. But all of this could have been avoided if the authorities had communicated honestly and openly about what happened right away. For once. Stalin created Israel. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin created Israel. The Declaration of Independence of Israel was proclaimed 75 years ago, on May 14, 1948. And on May 18, 1948, the USSR became the first country to de jure recognize the Jewish state. Without Soviet diplomatic and military support, the plan to create Israel might not have materialized. There are many versions of why, with the end of World War II, the Soviet Union suddenly began to support the plan to create a Jewish state in Palestine. It is generally accepted that Stalin saw the creation of Israel as a counterweight to Britain in the Middle East. Perhaps Stalin simply empathized with the Jewish people, wanting to give them a state after the horrors of the Holocaust. Finally, there are conspiracy theories about what really drove Stalin. According to one of them, Stalin wanted to help create a Jewish state only to get the atomic bomb as soon as possible. Allegedly, in exchange for Soviet assistance in the creation of Israel, Jewish scientists who participated in the development of the US nuclear program promised to share secret documents with the Soviet Union. Allegedly, Stalin negotiated with the representatives of world Zionism through the famous Jewish figure Solomon Mikhails, and negotiated successfully. The resolution to create Israel was adopted on November 29, 1947, and on January 12, 1948, a month and a half later, Mikhails was killed. Killed, according to the testimony of Viktor Abakumov, on Stalin's personal orders. Radiation incident in Kramatorsk. This story begins in the 1970s in Kramatorsk, where workers in one of the quarries lost a small capsule from one of their devices. Okay, they lost a capsule, who cares? Except that the instrument was a radioisotope level gauge, and the capsule contained cesium-137. In 1980, a panel house was commissioned in Kramatorsk, one of hundreds of thousands of such houses built in the USSR. Except that this particular house had a surprise: a deadly capsule buried in the wall, which had gotten there together with the rubble from the quarry. As a result, an 18-year-old girl died in one of the apartments in the summer of 1981, followed a year later by her 16-year-old brother, then their mother. Another family moved into the apartment in which a teenage son died in 1987, and his younger brother became seriously ill. All the victims died of leukemia, with doctors citing bad heredity as the cause. You know who helped find the culprit? A simple Soviet carpet on the wall. Shortly before the last teenager died, a rug was hung on the wall in his room. When the young man had already passed away, his parents suddenly noticed a scorched spot on the carpet. The father of the deceased boy pushed for a thorough investigation. His apartment was tested for radiation background, which unexpectedly showed a huge excess of. The capsule in the wall was found and its owner was identified by its serial number. Fortunately, it killed only 6 people and disabled 17, but can you imagine the level of negligence? And what if this was not an isolated incident? Lomonosov is the son of Peter the Great. I've already told you about Mikhail Lomonosov, the genius of Russian science in the 18th century. He spoke 19 languages, was an expert in all sciences, and so on. His story is inspiring in that he was the son of simple peasants, but at the age of 19 he went to Moscow on his own to study, which was unheard of before him. But there is an alternative theory that explains his sudden rise from a simple peasant's son to a member of the Imperial Academy of Sciences in 15 years. Outwardly, Mikhail Vasilievich was quite similar to Peter. Tall stature, small feet and hands, round fleshy face. Let's add an inquisitive mind, friends in temperance, and a fondness for alcohol. Is that it? No. In fact, the author of the myth is an Arkhangelsk sailor Vasily Karelsky. In the 1950s, he published his memoirs in the newspaper Soviet Fisherman, in which he claimed he had seen a document that showed that Lomonosov was Peter's son. Allegedly, it was written that in January-February 1711, when the Tsar was arrested in the village of Ust-Tosna, 35 kilometers from St. Petersburg, he was provided by some guy named Luka with a girl, Yelena Sivkova, an orphan for carnal pleasures. After Tsar Peter left, Yelena became pregnant, and Luka married her to his relative Vasily Lomonosov, in whose family Mikhail was born. According to many surviving documents on the movements of Tsar Peter, the entire fall of 1780 and early 1711 Peter spent in St. Petersburg, but he did not visit the lands to the north of the capital. No, of course, in theory, for the sake of carnal pleasures, he could go somewhere, but the evidence is not strong enough. Although it would explain why Russian Empress Yelizaveta Petrovna favored Lomonosov, a brother after all, albeit an illegitimate one. Vlasov's Russian flag. A conspiracy theory that the current Russian flag was used by none other than Andrei Vlasov, a former Red Army lieutenant general who was captured by Hitler's Germany and then led the Russian Liberation Army, which was by then the main military force of Russian collaborationism. Although this is not a theory, it's the truth. Vlasov's soldiers did use this flag, at least in a number of separate occasions, although it was forbidden by the German command. The actual symbol of the Roa was the St. Andrew's flag, which today is the flag of the Navy. Still, until the late 1980s, the tricolor in the USSR was indeed called the Vlasov tricolor. The main question here is why modern Russia chose a flag that is so firmly associated with traitors. Probably because the history of this flag begins long before the Second World War. The prototype of the tricolor was the flag of the Tsar of Moscow, first used by Peter the Great on his yacht St. Peter in 1693. Then it became a symbol of the Russian merchant navy. And in 1896, this flag was established as the national flag of the Russian Empire. True, after that the Russian Empire lost 2 wars and disintegrated. This is, by the way, exactly what the supporters of communism use as an argument. They say that this damn flag is to blame and we should have kept the red one. It was the one that brought good luck, not the tricolor. Bering Strait Dam. The Bering Strait Dam was a project by Soviet scientists to close the channel between the Arctic and Pacific Oceans, with the goal of large-scale climate change to improve conditions in the Far East and Kamchatka. In the future, the areas were to be suitable for the agricultural industry. In fact, it could be compared to the creation of the artificial Gulf Stream. And the pleasant bonus would be a bridge connecting Asia and America, Chukotka and Alaska, a road from London to New York, high-speed trains from Europe to the US, a fairy tale. True, all these remained only in theory. With the support of the USA and Canada, the project was designed for 8 to 10 years. There were already schemes and projects of the dam. The most powerful pumps for pumping water from the North Seas to the Pacific Ocean were to be powered by a network of nuclear power plants, located on both sides of the Bering Strait. However, then relations between the countries deteriorated and the project was frozen. And it's a good thing, because according to more modern calculations, the construction of such a dam would have led to the freezing of Japan and Polynesia, as well as to the melting of glaciers, then the greenhouse effect, global warming, and then a sharp cooling and a new ice age. And that's not even talking about the new, actually very old viruses and diseases that would be introduced by melting permafrost. In general, life's better without such mega projects. Babi Yar and Drobitskiy Yar. Babi Yar and Drobitskiy Yar are 2 forested areas in Kiev and Kharkov, both infamous as the site of mass shootings of civilians carried out by Nazi occupation troops in 1941-1942. The victims were mostly Jews, gypsies and captured Red Army soldiers. Babi Yar is better known now, as more than 100,000 people were shot there, and it was actually the first known case where Jews were not driven to concentration camps, but were purposefully exterminated at once. About 20,000 people were shot in Drobitskiy Yar too. So, what's the conspiracy? In fact, there are 2 theories here. The first one says that there were no mass shooting of Jews, and all this is a fabrication of world Zionism. The second one says that Babi and Drobitskiy Yars are really mass graves of Jews, but only the shootings by Germans were not so large-scale, and it was mainly anti-Semitic-minded, conscientious citizens collaborationists who killed their former neighbors. The Devil from Labynkyr. And again to cryptozoology, this time we move to the east of Yakutia. There is a Lake Labynkyr. It has a rectangular shape with dimensions of 14 by 4 kilometers. There is a strange crack at the bottom of the reservoir, due to which its greatest depth reaches almost 80 meters. Labynkyr has several anomalous features. Firstly, its water temperature is almost constant, from 2 to 9 degrees Celsius. Even in the harshest winter frosts, the lake almost never freezes, and the scientists cannot yet establish the reason for this. At the same time, the lake itself is located in the coldest point of the northern hemisphere, in the Aimikonsky Ulus. Every winter temperatures reach minus 50 degrees Celsius there. The second mystery is 3 islets in the very center of the reservoir. According to local residents, they sometimes mysteriously disappear and then reappear above the water. At the same time, the water level in Labynkyr does not change much. And finally, the local Yakut people believe that there is some huge animal in Lake Labynkyr, Labynkyrsky Chort, as they call him. It is believed that the monster itself came from a crevice at the bottom, that is, straight from hell. They describe it as a huge creature of dark grey color with a large mouth resembling a beak. The creature, according to the Yakuts, is very aggressive. It attacks fishermen, drags dogs, deer and small children underwater. In Soviet times, several expeditions were organized to the lake. They did observe and describe some kind of animal moving fast in the lake, and also found fishing nets with huge holes on the bottom, which are difficult to explain if we dismiss the possibility that they were left by some multi-meter-long animal. Finally, with the help of echo sounder, they were able to identify several tunnels at the bottom of the reservoir, which for some reason were never approached by fish. It is believed that the monster could be moving through these passages. But who is it? According to one version, it is an ichthyosaur which miraculously survived the permafrost period and awakened due to warming. Another says it is a giant pike, and according to the third, it is a figment of Yakut imagination. Radioactive burial site in the Kara Sea. The Kara Sea in the Arctic Ocean is often called the Arctic Nuclear Burial Ground. In the Soviet years, thousands of containers with radioactive waste were sunk there, and ships of the Soviet nuclear fleet lie at its bottom. The Kara Sea washes the Novaya Zemlya archipelago, was the central nuclear test site of the USSR operated since 1954. After some data was declassified, it turned out that according to scientists' calculations, there were 5 reactor compartments of nuclear submarines, 19 ships with solid radioactive waste, 755 blocks and units of nuclear power plants contaminated with radioactive substances not protected by hermetic packaging, and about 17,000 containers with nuclear waste at the bottom in the western part of the Arctic. And you know what the most interesting thing is? We don't know where exactly. Want to know more? Join my Patreon, where I've made an exclusive video on this topic for my $5 plus patrons. Lake Karachay. Lake Karachay is another body of water that is infamous for the accident at the NPO Mayak in 1957. Only if the Techa river is still flowing and you can find it, then Karachay, this lake is just not there. Official information says that this lake does not exist. Although Karachay used to bear the proud title of the most dangerous body of water in Russia. Waste from Mayak operations has been poured into this lake since 1951. Remember, for a couple of years before that, it was simply poured into the Techa river. During the period of operation, about 100 million curies, equivalent to 6 Chernobyls, of long-lived radionuclides accumulated in the lake. Since 1986, work has been underway to backfill this body of water. They got scared after Chernobyl. And on November 26, 2015, the lake's conservation work was declared complete. It is believed that all these 6 Chernobyls are preserved in a special concrete lens and are safe. But who knows for sure where all this radioactive waste from the backfilled lake can go through underground waters. Kola Superdeep Borehole. Soviet scientists drilled so deep into the earth that they could hear the screams of sinners from hell. You remember this story, don't you? If you don't, go watch my video about it. Romanov's gold. So, whose gold haven't we found yet? Of course, the gold of the Romanov family. Indeed, the royal family was shot in Yekaterinburg in 1918, and where is their gold? In August 1917, by order of the provisional government, Nicholas II was sent into exile in Tobolsk. They allegedly took many chests full of gold and jewelry with them. There is an assumption that in Tobolsk the Romanovs secretly transferred some of the jewels for safekeeping to local church ministers, nuns from the monastery and members of the retinue. When in April 1918 Nicholas II, together with Tsarina Alexandra and their daughter Maria, were sent to Yekaterinburg, the treasures were again divided. Some were taken to the capital of the Urals, and some remained in Tobolsk. Yes, in Yekaterinburg itself, before the shooting, some of the valuables were taken from the family by the Red Army, and some were plundered by the servants. But the Romanovs managed to save the bulk of the treasures. So where did it all disappear to? It's been more than 100 years, and there is still no answer. Some even believe that all the Romanovs' jewels are in Britain. Allegedly, Nicholas managed to send the family jewels there, but British bankers did not want to return such treasure. Therefore, they pressured George V, and because of them, cousin Georgie did not try to save his brother, and did not take him out of Russia, although such a proposal came from Alexander Kerensky, head of the provisional government. The British had the means. They were able to take out Nicholas' mother, Empress Maria Fedorovna, after all. There is an even crazier version that Nicholas II spent most of the wealth of the Romanovs to contribute them to the authorized capital of the Federal Reserve System of the United States. And then Rothschilds allegedly demanded that Woodrow Wilson transfer the system into their private ownership, along with the gold. And allegedly the assassination of the Russian monarch allowed the Rothschilds not to hand over the gold or pay for its rent, and they arranged this through Lev Trotsky and Yakov Sverdlov. It was the latter who allegedly ordered the execution of the Romanovs, and the order to exterminate the entire royal family came from his brother, a banker in America with ties to the head of the Fed and the Rothschild clan. Sverdlov was closely connected with Yekaterinburg and the local branch of the Bolshevik Party. It is no coincidence that in Soviet times this city was called Sverdlovsk. MMM's financial apocalypse. MMM is the most famous pyramid scheme in Russian history, and its founder Sergei Mavrodi is a cult figure. In his time he had enormous influence, so it is not surprising that many people take his words seriously. In fact, in the notice when he launched a new pyramid, MMM 2011, he regularly talked about the fact that we were approaching the financial apocalypse, and called himself the Messiah. In his interviews, Mavrodi repeatedly said that the financial apocalypse, that is, the collapse of the existing global financial system, was inevitable. Actually, the ideology was based on the postulates of the Occupy Wall Street movement. MMM supposedly fights against an unjust financial system. Mavrodi propagandized that each person is able to exchange some equivalents, money, conventional units, whatever, independently, without the participation of any intermediaries, banks. And that if all people unite and destroy the current domination of banks, it would be better for everyone. Naturally, Mavrodi always offered his own currency, Mavro, as an alternative, as an equivalent to the dollar, gold and other things. Mavrodi stated that when the whole world gets into the pyramid and switches to the Mavro, other currencies will simply not be needed. All transactions will take place within the system. The dollar will collapse and the financial apocalypse will come. However, initially you still had to pay for these Mavros with real money. But that's just a small thing, isn't it? Rokhlin's murder. The assassination of General Lev Rokhlin is yet another in a string of mysterious murders of the 1990s, and perhaps the most confusing. So, Lev Rokhlin, one of the commanders of the Russian army in the First Chechen War, who later refused to be awarded the title of Hero of Russia for it, because he did not think that it was possible to gain glory in the civil war. For 2 years he was a member of the pro-government party Our Home Russia, and then he left it and organized his own political force. At the same time he was quite popular with the people and was considered one of Yeltsin's main opponents. It is said that he wanted to take advantage of his popularity in the army and organize an armed coup. On May 12, 1998, he was dismissed from the post of chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee. On July 3, 1998, he was found murdered in his dacha. Would it seem that everything is simple? No. According to the official version, the sleeping Rokhlin was shot by his wife, Tamara Rokhlina, and the reason was given as a family quarrel. The general arrived late and without a present for his son's birthday, went upstairs and straight to bed. The wife got offended, was highly intoxicated, took her husband's gun, went upstairs and shot her husband in the temple. After that, she woke up the bodyguard, confessed to him and quietly waited for the police to arrive. She received an extremely mild sentence, 4 years of probation. Do I need to tell you why many people consider the official investigation to be extremely dubious? But still, let's talk about it. First, the sounds of gunshots. There were 4 people at the dacha at night. The Rokhlin spouses, their son Igor, and the security guard Alexander Pliskachev. Neither he nor their son heard the sounds. There was no silencer on the general's gun, and bullet marks were found on the first floor in the kitchen wall. Second, the murder took place in the middle of the night, an hour before Tamara had called her friends, was in a good mood and spoke warmly of her husband. And an hour later she changed her mind and shot him. There are also completely insane versions. It is alleged that Rokhlin's political enemies, with the assistance of Israeli doctors, zombified Tamara in a certain way. When she was undergoing treatment in Israel, they somehow put the idea of killing her husband in her head. The trigger was to be a phrase or a word uttered, for example, during a telephone call. Finally, there is a version that the murder was accidentally committed by the disabled son, who was mentally handicapped and characterized by outbursts of aggression, and Tamara took the blame for him. Oh yes, she herself retracted her first confession after 3 days, and insisted that her husband was shot by unknown masked man, and she was forced to incriminate herself because of the threats to her son and daughter. And in her last statement before the verdict, she accused her husband's security guard of the murder. Some more oddities from the case. During the examination of Tamara Rokhlina's body, injuries of an unclear nature were found, which she could not have inflicted on herself. Incidentally, the day after the murder, 3 bodies were found in a charred car 500 meters from Rokhlin's dacha, shot in the head. They were identified as local bandits. According to the official version, they died 3 days before the murder of Rokhlin, had a disagreement with other bandits over taking control of construction material trading firms. Rokhlin's associates, however, believed that in fact they were the real killers, and that they had been liquidated, covering their tracks by the orders of Rokhlin's murder. Soviet alien contact. In June 1979, in the vicinity of Derzhavinsk city of Turgay region in Kazakhstan, near the pioneer camp Berezka, located 20 kilometers from Derzhavinsk, an unknown object was observed by eyewitnesses for more than a day. An unknown flying object whose crew went outside and performed some actions similar to scientific research. According to the testimonies of children resting in the pioneer camp, these strange creatures were taller than 3 meters and differed only in the color of their belts. They were of frail build and moved with their arms stretched forward. Toward evening, a pioneer counselor was making her rounds of the camp and suddenly saw a 3-meter-tall giant on the path. He was sitting on the chair that had accidentally been left there. The alien looked at the counselor, who only managed to see his red eyes. The pioneer Svetlana Kvacheva told her father, a militia major, about this story. He raised a fuss, an investigation was conducted, thanks to which, for the first time in history, officially documented testimony of witnesses who saw aliens was obtained. Later, even the KGB became involved in the investigation. The same year, on June 26, there was information about a luminous object that was observed in the sky in the area. But no concrete conclusions about this incident could be made, or they are deeply classified. Relentless Sentry. And we end this level with a legend from the First World War. It is believed that it happened in the fortress of Asavets. In 1915, the Russian army was retreating under the German onslaught. To prevent the enemy from obtaining weapons, food and ammunition, the warehouses which could not be taken out were destroyed. One of the intendant colonels assured the command that the Germans knew nothing about one of the warehouses and proposed to blow up its entrance in order to use its stocks again after the return. They agreed, but in their hurry they forgot to inform the sentry inside the warehouse about the retreat. When the First World War ended, the fortress became part of independent Poland. Poles rebuilt the barracks, repaired the walls and removed the rubble. Legend has it that in 1924, while clearing one of the forts, soldiers came across a well-preserved underground tunnel. Imagine their surprise when, while clearing the tunnel, they heard a shout in Russian from the darkness, "Stop! Who's coming?" When asked by the Polish officer who he was and what he was doing here, the man from the dungeon replied, "I am a sentry, assigned here to guard the warehouse." When the stunned officer asked if the Russian soldier knew how long he had been there, the man replied, "Yes, I know. I took up my post 9 years ago, in August of 1915. What struck the Poles most of all was that while continuing to obey the military regulation of a country that no longer existed, the Russian sentry did not agree to leave his post and replied to all entreaties that only his commander or the emperor himself could relieve him from his duties. The sentry surrendered only after it was explained to him that the country he served had long since disappeared. Thanks for watching! And as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zeman Berze, Jimmy Albin, Petr Illich and Marina Holiday. See you guys next time!